How's it going? My name is James, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I made this bench using just dimensional lumber. Come check it out. So this bench is in our garage. It's going to be used for taking off boots and shoes, kind of storing them underneath. Eventually I'm going to put up a little bit of a coat rack up here and a little bit of a shelf, so stay tuned for future videos because I'll show you how I do that as well. But this is kind of just the first step in cleaning up this garage area and making it a bit more nice to look at and functional as well. Well, the first thing I wanted to do is make sure I cleared the space and kind of decluttered it to get an idea of what I wanted. I opened up the door over here and as you can see, we got some snow outside. It was a sunny day. It looked like we lived on the surface of the sun. We still have the big garage door, so I didn't need this to open completely, or I didn't need to worry about getting things actually through this door, but just that it wouldn't be an annoyance for people walking through. Well, next it was a matter of measuring the boards, and I just kind of laid them out, marked them all, and measured them. I squared a line across and then I cut them on the miter saw. Now normally I might set up a stop block to make sure each cut was exactly the same, but because I'm going to be cutting this down later, I didn't worry about that and I just cut them roughly to length. After this I took them to the vise, and this is where I started using my hand plane. Basically I take a long square, which I know is straight, and I'm pivoting it on the board to see if there's any high spots. Now if there's high spots, what's going to happen is you're going to start to see the square kind of pivot really freely. And what that means is that there's a little bit of a dome there that it's able to pivot in that direction. And so what I'll do is I'll just kind of remove any high spots. And this does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it kind of helps so that when you're gluing the boards together, there's no gaps between them. But one of the things you probably noticed about dimensional lumber is that it's not completely straight at the end. It's kind of got a rounded over corner. And if you're going to glue something together with dimensional lumber, that means it's often going to have those rounded over corners and make some little lines or indentations. It's not going to be completely smooth when you go to glue that up. And so one of the things that this also does is it just removes those roundovers. And when you glue this up, there's less material that you need to take off the top in order for it to look like one solid piece of wood. Being dimensional lumber, it planes really nicely. You get some beautiful shavings that come off, and it's always a lot of fun to break out the hand plane. Well, when it came to gluing up, I basically just laid out the clamps on the floor and went to work in arranging the wood in a way that looked pleasing and where I minimized any gaps that would have existed. Once I got all the pieces of wood laid out, I just kind of mentally made sure I was aware what needed to happen in order for me to glue these up efficiently. Anytime you're doing a glue up like this, there's always that moment of panic when you think to yourself, what if the glue dries before I'm able to actually get this all together? And so just made sure I kind of knew what I needed to do, and then just started spreading the glue to make sure that I was ready to go. And here you can see I'm just kind of making sure the glue is spread all around. I just use my finger for this and then put the boards in place. And then once everything's in place, I tighten it up with the clamps. And I use all these plane shavings that I've created to just wipe up any excess glue. And I do this on the top once the squeeze out kind of comes. And then I actually made sure to lift the whole thing up and get the glue off the bottom of it as well. And then actually clean up the glue off the floor, which it had spilled over there as well. Now there's two reasons for this. One is that I wanted to actually plane this down afterwards. And if you have glue that's kind of squeezed out and hardened, it's not very fun to plane. But also if you leave glue that's just kind of wet and globby on the surface, it takes a lot longer to dry. And so that's kind of a secondary motivation as well. One of the things I did after I got everything kind of clamped together in general space is I took a mallet with a piece of wood and just started whacking some of the high spots. And the reason I have that piece of wood is just to kind of keep it from denting the wood really aggressively. But the idea behind this is just to kind of lower any high spots so that there's less work to do later when I'm planing. So once the glue was all wiped off and ready to go, I switched gears and just let that dry. And then I started to work on the base for these, the base for the bench. Now for these, I knew I wanted a bunch of pieces of wood exactly the same length, and so I set up a little bit of a stop block with my miter saw. And basically for this construction, it was not anything special. I just glued them and screwed them. Here you can see I'm marking out lines for the drill, and so I'm going to drill holes straight through. And then I'm actually gonna countersink them as well. And for this, I just had a bit and brace around, so I decided to use that. You could obviously use a drill driver as well. The nice thing about a bit and brace is that it does give you that extra bit of control, so you can go exactly as deep as you want without fear of, you know, going too quickly through the material. After that, it was just spreading some glue on the top of the joint, drilling into it, and making all of these boxes. Got these in place where I thought I wanted them, and wanted to make sure that we had some good proportions in terms of where these sat on the wall compared to the length of the bench. I think it was achieved fairly nicely. And so you can see here, I'm testing out kind of the strength of first 2 of these things, and then I also made another one just to make sure it was extra sturdy and that it would work out. This is now the fun part where I get to flatten this thing that I glued up. And between the wall and the van, there was just enough room to kind of have this piece of, this huge piece of the bench on my workbench and to plane it down. But this was probably about the maximum size I could work with. First, again, I take that straight edge to it, and basically all I'm doing at this point is just figuring out where the high spots are. Now, at the very beginning, the high spots are gonna be very obvious because they just kind of stick out. Now again, you start with the high places and you just kind of work those down. So at first you're not really taking much material because you're only skimming across those very high places. Once everything kind of works down to the same level, that's when you start to really remove more material, because the plane's now able to take these passes or this material from every area of the board. And as you can see, it took a long time. This is sped up quite a bit and it still feels long just looking at it. But it was a lot of fun, and it's kind of neat thinking about taking a bunch of pieces of wood that you just got at a lumber yard that were, you know, these are just rough 2x4s, nothing special about them at all. It's nice to kind of think that you can take them, laminate them together into something that looks half decent. So that's kind of neat. The other thing I love about this is that there's no dust, or just very minimal dust, when you're using a hand plane. I know when I was making a table using kind of the same method, a bit of hand planing, a bit of palm sanding and stuff like that, you just get so much dust and the air just gets terrible. And where I am right now, it's minus 15 degrees outside. It's covered in snow, so I'm not gonna go do this outside. I'm not gonna air out the garage, you know, with all the dust afterwards. So it just worked out a lot better to use a hand plane. And it was great actually not really sanding this at all, just kind of using a hand plane to get it to a finish that I wanted to. Was awesome. I took this piece over to the stand that it was on and I started to mark out the edges so I can get a nice clean edge on them, and then getting ready to cut this with the circular saw. So I cut off the edges of these, make them nice and square, and then because where I kind of clamped and used the saw, there was some marks, I decided to just plane those off. As soon as I started, it was a little bit wobbly, so I just got my kids to sit on the bench and they provided enough stability to finish off that area. And again, I didn't have to sand any further, I just applied the stain right to that surface, and it seemed to take it pretty well. And I was pretty pleased with the results of that. And then the next day I came out in the garage and applied a coat of polyurethane. For this project that's just gonna be out in the garage, I applied one coat, and I did a little bit of an experiment of applying it with just a rag. Now, normally it says you need to brush this on, and it kind of makes a big deal of that. I just kind of thought maybe I'll just try to wipe it on and see how it goes. And you know, I wasn't actually too disappointed with the results. I think wiped it on, it kind of soaked up a bunch of it. I sanded it down just with 1000 grit afterwards, and it's fine for what I needed it for. So take that for what it is. Well, after this, it was a matter of painting the legs, and this was probably one of the parts of the project that was the least enjoyable. Just because painting legs is kind of finicky, you're worried about getting paint on surfaces, but it was what it was. And you can see, or maybe you can't see, it probably looks like these are nicely painted. They're not that great. I just kind of got the paint on there, did one coat. Again, if this was something for inside, I might take a bit more care. I might worry about sanding all the surfaces down very nicely. But because this is a garage, I just kind of painted it and then let that dry overnight and was ready to go. Now, I already mentioned that originally the plan was to tack this into the wall, and so I pre-drilled a bunch of holes to kind of do that, not realizing that the studs up here didn't meet this, kind of met the concrete down here. Oh yeah, you can hear that. So I just attached the base of these legs up into the bench itself, and that was pretty much it. Now we got this great bench out here that we can use hopefully for years to come. Next week, I'm hoping to build a shelf that's gonna go above my head here, and some coat rack as well. So you can come check that out if you want to. Hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss that. And I hope to kind of make this a nice little area where we can store some shoes, where we can have some coats hanging up, where we can have some baskets up top, maybe for snow gear and things like that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see past videos, there's more on the channel. Stay tuned for future videos as well. And until next time, take care.